the next 2 hours. And on this 21st day of September, our focus will be what is at play with the parliamentarians, whether it is the National Assembly or the Senate. On the first working day of this week, we saw one of the issues that were made the main agenda was that the members of Parliament in the National Assembly will have their perks and allowances back. And the Speaker of the National Assembly, Moses Wetangula, had his reasons for that, saying, of course, with all the responsibilities that they shoulder in the various constituencies, they deserve to have their allowances back, as well as the game of numbers and fighting over who has control of the National Assembly and Senate and government policy moving forward. That's going to be our main focus and topic this morning, with two special guests. That is political analysts Mark Bichachi and Dismas Mokua, a political risk analyst. And they'll be going through the papers with me as well, the headlines of the leading dailies right here. But before we get to that, let's look at issues surrounding food security or insecurity thereof. And the government has made good its promise to inject billions of shillings into the fertilizer subsidy program to cushion farmers from the high costs of food production during this short rains planting season. Treasury earlier today announced the release of 3.6 billion shillings for the program, but just how much of a boost is it? NTV's Lois Wangoi spoke to a section of farmers in the breadbasket county of Uasin Gishu and tells us of some of the past pains that could sow doubt in the success of the program.
The short rains season is a blessing to farmers in the country who, after enjoying the long rain season, get to farm short-term crops like vegetables, beans, potatoes, and fast-maturing maize in sections of eastern and western Kenya. The reintroduction of subsidized fertilizer is a welcome relief.
Sasa naona president yetu ameanza kufanya mambo makubwa. Tunampongeza zaidi.
Na siku ya leo tunafurahi sababu hata alitaja mambo ya fertilizer, subsidy ya fertilizer. Na pia kama kiongozi wa North Rift region, ninaomba sana bei ya fertilizer irudishwe chini kidogo. Lakini kufika mwaka ujao, tunaomba hiyo subsidy iongezwe ikuje chini kidogo, ikuje 2,500.
In a memo from the Ministry of Agriculture, farmers have been directed to purchase the fertilizer from their closest NCPB depot. From experience, a section of farmers question the bureaucracy at NCPB depots, saying it locks out most farmers from benefiting from the government's fertilizer subsidy programs.
Sometimes tunapoenda unapata unaambiwa shamba yako ni kiasi gani, leta barua ya chief, kitambulisho, sijui wanataka uone. So sometimes it is too difficult hata wewe kufanya nini kufikia hiyo mbolea.
In the statement, the government has regulated that a farmer can only buy 150 kg bags of fertilizer. This perhaps being a measure by the government to curb cartels in the industry. But farmers are worried that cartels may benefit more.
Na pia hawa brokers, wakati mwingine mbolea ikitolewa, unapata kuna brokers. Wanakuja wanabroker, wanachukua hiyo mbolea, hata hatupati.
Sasa sisi wenye tunakaa hapa mashinani, tunaweza kuwa tunazisikia tu kwa radio, tunaziona kwa TV, lakini mbolea labda kutufikia italeta hatutaiona.
In context, the subsidy is the government's intention move to caution small-scale farmers against increased cost of production, but in reality, large-scale farmers tend to benefit most. In this case, 100 bags of subsidized fertilizer serves 50 acres of land. Is a farmer who owns 50 acres and above poor to warrant a subsidy?
Ama tunauza mahindi isiwe chini ya shilingi 5,000. Like 6,000 and above. Kwa sababu kweli tumegaramika kuchukua trakta ulime shamba, urudie kulima hilo shamba, ununue mbolea na mbegu.
Lois Wangoi, NTV, in the county of Uasin Gishu.
But even as farmers rub their hands together in anticipation of the fertilizer boost, the forecast for the October to December 2022 short rains remains gloomy. The Kenya Meteorological Department predicts depressed and poorly distributed short rains. This means that the situation could get worse for the nearly 4 million people who desperately need food assistance. NTV's Rose Wangoi on that report.
For Mahada Gele, having livestock means having freedom and security. About a year ago, she had about 60 goats and sheep, but her only source of livelihood has been wiped out by the drought.
I had 60 goats, but 20 succumbed to drought.
Due to the persisting drought, Mahada is unable to provide a balanced diet for her family, resulting in her children's malnutrition.
We are helped by the hospital feeding program where we get porridge, but it's too little for the family. Sometimes we lack anything to eat and my children sleep hungry.
The mother of 6 is among hundreds of families in Wajir County who are facing starvation due to a prolonged drought. Climate shocks have turned upside down the lives of pastoralists, and things are expected to get worse, according to the weatherman. The country is expected to receive poorly distributed rainfall during this year's October, November and December seasons.
We still are within the neutral to negative Indian Ocean dipole, which for East Africa means reduced rainfall.
The country is already experiencing drought conditions, particularly in arid and semi-arid counties, due to inadequate rainfall over the last 4 seasons.
We are still in the emergency situation, and we are going to remain there as long as the climate predictions remain the same. So, and food assistance, aid assistance is really needed at this particular moment.
With a worsening drought trend, the number of people in need of urgent food assistance in Kenya is projected to increase further to about 4.3 million between October and December this year.
We are looking at the situation is projected to worsen, but then we're doing coordination. We are strengthening our coordination and partnership across the board, both at the national and county levels, and that's what we are working.
The situation is dire, and county government's interventions cannot cope with the demand of water, livestock feed and food for vulnerable families. Rozongwe, NTV.
Well, even as a cash-strapped government struggles to employ penny-pinching moves to free up funds, a report by the Controller of Budget has revealed just how the presidency splashed $500 million shillings on travel alone in the 3 months leading up to the general election. The report shows how State House spent an average of 4 million shillings daily on hospitality and other campaign-related activities. And TV's Sydney Chazima takes a closer look at the previous government's extravagant spending and the massive task ahead for the new administration.
A whopping 579 million shillings was splashed in 3 months ending June by the offices of former President Uhuru Kenyatta and his then Deputy William Ruto on campaign-related travels and activities locally. A report by the Controller of Budget has detailed. The report also detailed how Kenyatta spent 4 million shillings a day on Azimio-related activities at State House in the past 12 months. Compounded, this amount comes to 1.46 billion shillings a year. Wholesomely, the national government spent 20.17 billion shillings on local and international travels up to June 2022. Last year, an expenditure of 14.21 billion shillings was spent on the same activities. The figure of 20.17 used this year represents a 41.9% increase. The Foreign Affairs Ministry was another big spender, splashing doubled figures of 2.44 billion shillings up from the initial 1.402 billion shillings on travel. This spendthrift nature of government goes against Treasury's bid to cut non-essential travel locally and abroad to free up cash for development and lessen the overdependence on debt. Recently, Nandi Senator Samson Cherargei sensationally claimed that President William Ruto inherited a dead economy with only 93.7 million shillings left at the Treasury. Sydney Chazima, NTV.
Elsewhere in court, a witness in the Aror and Kimwarer corruption case told the court that former President Uhuru Kenyatta signed the project implementation papers for the dams on the 4th of August 2009 while he was Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Finance. The witness, Charity Mboi, also told the court that then Minister for Regional Development Frederick Gumo and the late John Mishuki also signed the project papers in 2008. Mboi worked as a procurement specialist at the Kerio Valley Development Authority, which assessed the project's bidding documents. She also denied that she assisted in inserting tender numbers, Boy had been charged alongside former financiers Henry and others before she agreed to be a witness for the prosecution. Now let's go to the business of the House, or at least what's been going on in the induction of both houses, that's the National Assembly members and the Senate. A resolution by the National Government Constituency Development Fund could see constituencies with less wards receive less CDF allocations, even as MPs remain upbeat that the fund will continue despite a pending court decision. This means that should the resolution be implemented, at least 21 constituencies will get less allocation. NTV Senior Political Affairs reporter Kennedy Moredi attended the second day of the members of the National Assembly induction, and here's his report.
A closed-door meeting of members of the National Assembly Tuesday evening experienced fireworks from MPs with the National Government Constituency Development Fund Board, communicating a decision that will see a number of constituencies receive less allocations in this financial year. According to the latest information, constituencies with more than 3 wards will get more allocations. Those with 8 wards will be allocated more.
Maximum with 8 will be getting 165 million, and the minimum 21 constituencies with 3 wards will be getting 131 million. Initially, it was equal.
It has nothing to do with the Member of Parliament. It has to do with the people he represents. For example, I represent a constituency that has more than 500,000 people, and there's a constituency that has less than 100,000. We can't be equal.
Sources within the meeting intimate that the resolution is some constituencies serve more people than others, and thus they deserve a higher allocation.
You're asking me, as a member of representing a constituency and a city that has a huge population and needs those. In some parts of Nairobi, there is extreme underdevelopment compared to even some of the rural areas. In fact, urban poverty is hidden, invisible poverty.
Mimi nina wards 4 na ninapata milioni 138. Kwa hivyo mimi naona ni sawa tu, ule ako na ward 6 hata akipata milioni 160, kwa sababu wako na ward nyingi. Pia wale watu wanataka service. Hakuna haja upeane watu 15,500 na unapeana watu 200,015.
Sirisia MP John Waluke is against the move and says this will disenfranchise some constituencies.
Projects are affected. Like me, I had decided to put up storage buildings in my constituencies for schools. Now, like this year, I had proposed 5 schools with the storage building. I was told how to reduce it to 2.
According to the MP who has been nominated by his coalition, that is the Azimio One Kenya, to serve in the Parliamentary Service Commission, the move is unfair, noting that Speaker Moses Wetangula had given an assurance that allocation should not be reversing gains already made, but better on them.
And even the bursaries is also affected. Everything is affected in the constituency, in the whole constituency.
To Waluke, the practice should be constituencies should all have a base figure as per what all constituencies received, then better on them as per the number of wards.
By the way, we're only talking about the CDF. The other allocations, as far as the counties are concerned, and as far as the national budget is concerned, is not going to be based on those calculations. They will still remain fair and equitable for some of our underdeveloped and poorer parts of our country.
The subject will be a topic of discussion Wednesday, as a consensus is still sought by about 21 constituencies that will be affected. Another closed-door session saw the Acting Inspector General of Police give the MPs a status update on the country's security status, as well as a brief on the services help to members as they now assume office. Kennedy Moredi, NTV.
Meanwhile, Senate Speaker Amason Kingi has assured senators that he will, as a matter of urgency, robustly engage relevant stakeholders to ensure senators are sufficiently facilitated to discharge their oversight responsibilities as spelled out in the Constitution. On his part, Clerk of the Senate Jeremiah Nyegenye says that it's imperative that senators are fully aware of their roles, powers and functions in order to effectively represent interests of their counties and defend the devolved governance structure. Our senior political affairs reporter Duncan Haemba is in Naivasha for that week of induction and has this report from yesterday's highlights.
Senate Speaker Amason Kingi has promised to bite the bullet for his troops in the Senate by pushing for provision of oversight funds for senators, where his two predecessors have failed in ensuring the members effectively play their oversight role.
I undertake to robustly and as a matter of urgency, engage all the relevant stakeholders, including government agencies concerned, with a view to putting in place a system that ensures honorable senators are sufficiently facilitated in order for you to discharge your oversight responsibilities successfully as spelled out in the Constitution.
Both the Speaker and the Clerk, Jeremiah Nyegenye, challenged the newly constituted Senate not to drop their guard and claw back on gains already made in the last 9 years since the inception of devolution by firmly understanding their roles, powers and functions.
It is usually said that things just don't go wrong. They start wrong.
An understanding of these functions of the Senate and the history of the Senate in defending its role as provided for in Article 96(3) of the Constitution will enable senators to appreciate the strides that were made by the Second and the Third Senate in positioning the Senate as a defender of devolved government. It will also enable senators to appreciate the challenges and opportunities in division of revenue.
We have the cardinal duty to shape and positively build our gains already made by our predecessors in the last decade, to positively influence and improve operations and effective functioning of the Senate during our tenure.
On the never-ending sibling rivalry between the two houses of Parliament, Kingi says it is time the august house got its house in order and also harmony among the three arms of government.
The people of Kenya have for a long time been treated to interesting legislative and executive power plays whose outcomes have left the masses with more questions than clear answers on what constitutes the role of legislators in advancing equitable and unbiased development in our country. Kenyans had almost become tired of the casual conduct of governance business.
After taking their oaths of office, senators are now undergoing refining, panel beating and sharpening to arm them adequately as they get down to business. Duncan Haemba, NTV, in Naivasha.
And finally, to one of the other biggest stories of yesterday, Sports Cabinet Secretary Ambassador Amina Mohammed has thrown a spanner in the works after terming Football Kenya Federation President Nick Mwendwa's decision Tuesday to regain access to their offices at the Gold Project in Kasarani as a break-in. In a strongly worded statement, the sports CS says the FKF officials are still indicted. Football in the country is still under the mandate of the FKF Transition Committee that she had appointed. Elijah Oko with the latest twist in FKF Ministry of Sports saga.
It had been close to 11 months since FKF officials led by President Nick Mwendwa were able to access Kandanda House at the Gold Project in Kasarani. On Tuesday morning, with the barrage of media and police officers, Nick Mwendwa opened the gates that had been closed off, signaling that he was back in charge. On 11th of November 2021, Sports Cabinet Secretary Ambassador Amina Mohammed disbanded the Football Kenya Federation National Executive Committee and barred FKF officials and staff from accessing Kandanda House following investigations by the Office of the Sports Registrar. Amina then went on to appoint a 15-member caretaker committee to manage the affairs of FKF. The committee's mandate ended and Amina appointed a transition committee which, according to the CS, is still currently managing the country's football affairs. On Monday night, during an interview on NTV's News Sports magazine show, Caesar Handa, a member in the committee, announced that the league would resume on the 1st of October.
So there was a request by the teams to have the game, the beginning of the league postponed to the 1st of October. So that is when the league's, the KPL is supposed to kick off.
Less than 24 hours later, Mwendwa made this pronouncement.
Ligi zote za Kenya zitaanza rasmi. Ligi zinazofaa zitaanza rasmi mwezi mmoja kutoka leo.
The embattled FKF boss exuded confidence that the suspension by FIFA would be lifted soon.
Tutawaandikia FIFA. Natarajia within days ban ya Kenya itakuwa lifted.
Several hours later, CS Amina released a terse statement terming the action by Nick to regain control of Kandanda House as a break-in. The latest debacle is likely to cast further doubt whether Kenya will regain its status in global football with clubs and national teams unable to compete in regional competitions. Elijah Oko, NTV.
You can expect that to be a big talking point today and into the weekend as we watch the responses from the stakeholders as well as FIFA, if they'll make mention of this particular development from yesterday that has been termed as break-in, but it is seen as well as from Nick Mwendwa's perspective as taking back the reins. Let's look at what we'll be focusing on, or at least what you can expect to see later on as on our radar, on our news radar, and to our news diary. And today, President William Ruto will be giving an address at the 77th UN General Assembly. And you will be definitely getting the highlights to that. You've just seen what happened yesterday at the Senate induction session. It continues today, and that is also on our radar. Senate induction to continue in Naivasha, as well as a National Assembly induction to continue. And yes, that story that we've just aired there by Elijah, FKF Ministry Row, as Nick Mwendwa returns. We're focusing on this to get the responses and see if it'll move forward from here. And then we will be also looking at the Azimio Kenya Kwanza feud over House positions. Who has the numbers, who has majority, who wields control. Of course, everyone is claiming that they have from their various factions politically. So we'll be seeing the development on that later on in the day. So let's look at the dailies now, and I want to introduce the two gentlemen who will be going through the papers with me, as well as a discussion on the state of politics, the interests in Parliament, the intrigues and intents that they have. Mark Bichachi, who has just coughed, I wish you good health. Good morning, Bichachi.
Good morning, good morning. You happen to be pushing things that cause my allergies to flare up at me, so this is entirely your fault.
Apologies for that. Mark Bichachi, political analyst, joining us this morning, as well as Dismas Mukua, political risk analyst. He'll probably explain what that is. Politics is a risky affair, as you're about to see from what is headlined in the Daily Nation. How Raila lost, gentlemen. That is what the Daily Nation is leading with. Some in the Odinga camp believe agents of state-aided theft of votes in Ruto's favor. And this is in page 4, 5, and 6. And they look at several areas, almost doesn't count, change agents, curse of incumbency, and supremacy battles. From what is highlighted here, not to give too much away how Raila lost this last election, what stands out for you? Start with Dismas and go to Mark.
Well, I think when people are now doing the post-mortem on what happened to Raila Odinga, there are many reasons.
You make it sound like it's a death. They're still present in politics.
I think for him it's really a wrap. But when you look at the matrix, there are a variety of reasons. And people say with the benefit of hindsight, it's 2020. But in my view, there are three primary reasons.
Yeah.
Number one, Raila's got this stellar record of running as an anti-establishment candidate his entire life, from the time he joined politics. For the first 4 runs, he was running against the system. But this time round, he was running as the establishment candidate. That meant that he would not deploy his normal politics. You know, calling out on corruption and blaming everything on the state. So he went to the ballot carrying all Jubilee's liabilities on his back. And then number two, he lost many friends. The people who initially assisted him in CORD and NASA to put together a very powerful system. Because of his poor capacity of maintaining friends, he lost Mr. Moses Wetangula, he lost Mr. Musalia Mudavadi, and then also we are told that there was a brain behind the NASA campaign, that's Mr. Jimmy Wanjigi. Now, when you lose these key people who've been in your kitchen cabinet, people have given you numbers, then you've got a crisis. And then number three, this now was from Dr. William Ruto's side. Dr. William Ruto ensured that he has maintained his traditional base of Jubilee, that is Mount Kenya, as well as the Rift Valley, in his matrix, very strong, with a very tight grip, and then converted all the Raila regions into battlegrounds, especially Western Kenya, where Wetangula and Musalia Mudavadi come from. It was converted into a battleground, and then the same happened in Kisii and the parts of Coast. And then finally, it's now very clear that Mr. Raila Odinga does not have attention to detail. He doesn't look at the small details that are eventually determine who wins an election. Unlike Dr. Ruto, who we understand as granular detail, that he pays attention to the small things. Because if you look at the numbers, Raila lost by about 233,000 votes only. That is something that Raila would have worked on. Say, I did retain Wetangula and Musalia, and then work on the turnover, the turnout in, say, Kakamega, in Vihiga, in Kisii, in good parts of, his strongholds. We would be talking about an entirely different game.
There seems to be a point that is not quite in line with what you have put forward, and that's point number 3 in terms of this report. Curse of incumbency. Raila also lost his traditional base by running as an establishment candidate, while Ruto cast himself as a change champion and voice of the marginalized. Some may say that there was taking things for granted because there was a weight of what was termed the system. And on the other side, they did not take anything for granted and worked on every detail. Do you see this as one of the main reasons for failure?
You know, this is what I told a friend of mine yesterday, that Azimio la Umoja One Kenya Alliance seems to do everything in their power to lose the election. What I mean by that is when you look at the cacophony of errors that were coming out of the Azimio One Kenya Alliance, one will be forgiven to think that perhaps there was a taking for granted that the victory was already theirs. Let's go to election day. Were there errors in terms of deploying agents and having agents on the ground? Yes, there were. Did they have enough agents? No, they didn't. You go to voter turnout, 233,000 votes. You look at some of the places in Nyanza, which should be the bedrock of Raila Odinga's support, registering 73% turnout. When you look at a turnout, if they had just come out 83, 84%, then Raila Odinga would be president today. So you've got his bedrock supporters not coming out to vote in the right terms. Then you've got the infighting. You've got, to date, Winnie Odinga and other members of the campaign trading public barbs on Twitter, blaming Winnie for running the communication outfit badly. Then you've got the issues between the Macau Mtua-led team, the communications team, who was the spokesman, who was doing this, who was leading that. Was Junet the campaign manager? Was it the former Laikipia governor? And it is all this manner of issues.
Yes.
Plus, of course, the fact that the traditional people who were known to support Raila Odinga and to lead him to his team towards success were marginalized. And it is this kind of issues, this silo mentality as well, that brought the Azimio One Kenya coalition to a loss in an election that was Raila Odinga's to lose, literally. So what the Nation is reporting, what Boniface Mwangi wrote, is honestly the truth of the matter. And One Kenya, Azimio One Kenya Alliance needs to really look sharply at the indictment that the polls gave them, look quite sharply at what Kenyans are saying, and then critically also look at Raila Odinga and ask themselves, is he going to be their flag bearer in 2027? They also need to borrow a leaf from William Ruto. William Ruto hit the ground in 2018, never looked back, campaigned every day until he became president. So One Kenya Azimio, if they're looking at me and they're listening to me, the time is now. It's time to get your house in order. It's time not to look backwards. I think there's been a great focus on the Supreme Court, and they're going to change the judges, etc., etc. It's not going to change the material fact that Dr. William Ruto is president of this republic. I think they need to look forward, correct their mistakes, streamline the operations, and get back on the horse, because 2027 is coming. And if they've not learned from the last 4 years, I can tell them for free that Dr. William Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya, is already preparing himself for 2027.
Do you share his, just shortly before he interjects, that his view that it is game over for Raila in terms of that level of leadership in the future?
You know, here's the thing. I was taught in my tradition never to count a man out. He's definitely up there in age. He's definitely looking at retirement. But would I count him out? 30 years of Kenyan politics has taught me never to count the man out.
Yes, Ditmas.
Yeah, three things that I'd like to point out. In the Azimio la Umoja campaign secretariat, we are now made to believe that people were hired or their services retained not based on competence or being subject matter experts, but rather on levels of sycophancy and proximity to the presidential candidate. That if you're a good sycophant or you're part of a family, you're given a position, never mind that you don't have capacity to deliver on anything in the campaign. So if you're a good sycophant, you'll be in the kitchen cabinet, you'll be doing everything. And then number two, the messaging was horrible, especially the last mile messaging. And I'm speaking this as somebody who has ever participated in a presidential campaign and put together last mile campaign messaging. You will recall Dr. Ruto, his last speech, he said that when I become the president of the Republic of Kenya, I'm going to have a cup of tea with Mr. Raila Odinga so that we can understand his role in the opposition. That's what Dr. Ruto told folks, his last rally. On the other hand, Mr. Raila Odinga told his supporters that have embraced the handshake doctrine. If I win, I'll have a handshake, and if I lose, I will have a handshake. Now, how do you tell your supporters that as a strong presidential candidate, you are already looking at the possibilities of losing and going for another handshake? And you see, you've got a record of handshakes, right from President Moi to President Kibaki and President Kenyatta. So for the people who had a lot of faith and confidence in your capacity to become a president, they will sit back and say, wait a minute. So whether he wins, whether he loses, there's going to be a handshake.
Okay.
Yeah. And then finally, he has this high appetite, I've said, of not maintaining friends. And I would even venture and suggest that had Mr. Raila Odinga ensured that he maintained NASA intact as it was, and then just do a bit of rebranding, he would have not lost by the 203,000 votes.
All right.
Today he would be at the United Nations preparing to address the world.
So would you revise your view earlier about it being over for Raila in the political scene and say more perhaps for Azimio, because we now see, you know, the cracks within the structure of this coalition, that it is over for Azimio as we know it, but not quite for Raila Odinga?
Well, Raila is referred to as an enigma, as a Agwambo, as a Tinga, he's got a capacity of reinventing himself, and he does it effortlessly for several reasons. That his base is largely emotional and irrational, so they don't ask questions. When he tells them to jump, they will jump. They'll merely ask how high. But as we speak right now, this election that he has lost, all the ducks were lined in one neat row. He had everything that he needed to win. Yeah. He had the backing of President Kenyatta. We understand there were state house resources. If you look at the headline, 55 billion was spent, you know, buying people a lot of teas and coffees. So he had everything lined up, but he lost it. So when you speak to a number of Kenyans, they say, wait a minute, we've been backing these oaths for a long time. Yes. And I think it's time for us to have an entirely different ball game. Okay. And for me, as we have this conversation, he would need to go the extra mile to convince people to vote for him. And this means that people within, other people want to become president 2027. Yes. Like, say, Kalonzo Musyoka or Jimmy Wanjigi. This is the time for them to pull up their socks and tell us what they can offer. As Mark Pichachi has indicated, if you want to become president of the Republic of Kenya, you start campaigning the moment the other president has been sworn in. Not really doing the huge rallies, but doing strategic tunnels. Right. But the other day when I saw Kalonzo speaking, I said to myself, does he really have capacity to face William Samoei Ruto? Probability not. All right. And it's interesting you mentioned Tinga because that's the name of one of our colleagues here. And I want us to turn to the standard. No, I was discussing Raila, not the colleague. And just look at what is, because you were describing Raila the enigma, and one of the terms that he's known as is Tinga. And the standard somewhat phrases it a bit different. And it's looking at it more as in the framing of the cracks within Azimio, trouble in Raila's paradise, not necessarily looking at, as you termed it, a post-mortem. And yes, this is last week's unveiling of Azimio Coalition's parliamentary leadership lineup lifts the lid on a silent rebellion that has been simmering within Raila Odinga's ODM, even as a party says all is well and that the disaffection is democracy at play. The full report on page 5 and 6, and some of the quotations there from Junet Mohammed and the Alego Usonga MP, as well as Mbadi, a nominated member of parliament. Any surprises here as to the changing chorus of voice, which was before harmony, and now there is, you know, it's really a bit of noise now coming out of the Azimio fold? Well, when you look at the three leaders mentioned there, what is the common denominator among those three MPs? Just look at the common denominator. And the person Raila Odinga has settled on to be minority leader in the National Assembly is Opiyo Wandayi. When I saw the name coming up, I was asking myself, is there room for top talent in Kenya to be given these positions? Like, for instance, one would have expected that a sharp gentleman like Otiende Amolo would actually be the minority leader in the National Assembly. Yes. Because he has demonstrated in the past that he's got the intellectual capacity, intellectual infrastructure, a strong understanding of the law in Kenya, and is a potential leader. Yes. Now, this points to Raila's major weaknesses, that he's got a very poor appetite for top talent. Right. I would expect that when you are putting together your National Assembly team and your Senate team, you go for the sharpest tools in your shed. But sincerely, Mark Bichachi, you know how it plays out in the political field. There's rewarding of, I don't want to call them cronies, but your loyal people around you. That's what plays out.
Definitely. You know, one of the things that we must be very clear about is that, just as Dismas has alluded to, there are those within ODM and Azimio who sense the impending retirement of Raila Odinga. That is one. And that gives him a bit of an Achilles heel upon which some will latch on to attack. He therefore needs to defend his staff now more than ever. But second is the reality of what is called opposition politics in this country. One, it does not officially exist. Not officially existing means that it does not have resources, pomp, nor any color whatsoever to do this opposition work. And therefore, whenever any coalition, and unfortunately this has been Raila Odinga's fate since 2013 when the new constitution came, he's constantly finding himself in the opposition. Now, what happens in the opposition? What happens in the opposition is there are no positions to share. Yes. There are fewer. There's fewer resources, there's fewer prestige, there's fewer positions to be issued out. And therefore, the pressure that is upon that particular coalition to look at someone like Junet and say, you know what, you've been at the top, you're part of the reason why we are not in the presidency, you're part of the reason we fail. So there's that feeling that in as much as he's a crony, he should not be rewarded. And then there's also the question of the new and up-and-coming leadership. You've got a swath of governors who are no longer governors now within the ODM ranks. You've got people who are first-time MPs. So you've got that sense of there needs to be a change of guard, there needs to be energy and revitalization of the campaign. If you look at the electric nature of Raila Odinga's campaign in 2007, or indeed the yes and no campaign in 2005, you realize it's as if the ODM engine has lost some steam. So what do they need? This process is necessary. It's part of democracy. There needs to be that internal re-engineering. Raila Odinga will have to re-establish himself as the alpha male within ODM. He needs to establish himself as the enigma of Kenyan politics. If he cannot pull a rabbit out of his hat, maybe within the next 2 years, then he will face a full-on rebellion, if not a full replacement within his ODM ranks. But let's not forget, within Azimio, the chair of Azimio is retired President Uhuru Kenyatta. So in the mix of these things, whether we like it or not, the stew of change and intrigues within Azimio is brewing. And if we are serious about it, then Raila Odinga, Uhuru Kenyatta need to begin to plan succession. They need to start thinking who is going to do what, who is going to lead this coalition to the next level.
Perhaps we'll look at, and I have to take a break at this point because we still have the Taifa Leo, we still have the Business Daily as well as the Star, and we have to, in all fairness, look at them. But another question that we might be able to answer is, nani ametosha mboga to be the opposition leader if it is going to be, handed over from Raila as the opposition leader as we have known him? And then also look at what the Taifa Leo are headlining with, wabunge waanza ulafi. Stay with us. AM Live continues with the review on this, and then look at the parliamentarians and their agenda right now and the power play of numbers, as well as the interests that are back and getting back the allowances for them. We will be back shortly. Welcome back to AM Live. We're going through the papers, and I've been charged by Dismas Mokua. I almost call him Didmas. That would be a big error. But based on this headline here by the Daily Nation, and looking at how Raila lost, and also the Standard that is looking at trouble in Raila's paradise, you said something that needs to be addressed is who was in charge of either campaign, that is the Azimio campaign and the Kenya Kwanza campaign. You feel there needs to be at least an analysis of that to understand how they won and how they lost?
Yes, because, leadership is, a campaign needs leadership.
Yes.
So in my understanding, having participated in one campaign, you identify your objective, that what we must do is win this campaign. Then you do the critical path analysis. What must we do to win? What are the key success factors? And then the buck needs to stop somewhere so that only one person takes responsibility for the success or failure of the campaign. Now, what was the situation obtaining at Azimio? There were multiple centers of power. There was the chairman of the Azimio Council, retired President Kenyatta. There was the presidential candidate, Raila Amolo Odinga. Then there was the running mate, Martha Karua. Then there was Professor Makau Mutua. There was Mr. Nderitu, the one who was running for governor. So there were many multiple centers of power, so that there was no coherent communication. Well, on the other hand, as the Kenya Kwanza, there was the candidate, Dr. William Samoei Ruto, who was running the ship. So everybody knew where the buck stops. That if you're looking for instructions or if you're looking for clarity, you know if you go to one individual, everything is going to be sorted out.
In a way, too many cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah. Then after the one individual, then now you add the coalition partners. That's Musalia Mudavadi, Wetangula, Amason Kingi, Mutua, and the rest. And they were always in meetings trying to refine their strategy. But for Mr. Raila Odinga, they were spread all over. Even, I mean, something basic like a public rally, instead of having a coherent message so that every speaker is reading from the same hymn book, is the same message going on, for Raila Odinga, it was scattered all over.
Yes.
And one of the things that people really complained about was having Mr. Junet Mohammed as the sole MC for every single Azimio function. So if there's a function in Kisii, is the MC. If there's a function in Mombasa, is the MC. So you know the local leaders feel disenfranchised. So they're asking themselves, Mr. Raila Odinga has come to my village, but I'm not seeing our son or daughter as the MC. Well, on the flip side for Dr. William Samoei Ruto, everybody read from the same hymn book. So after one particular meeting, it's the same message that they're communicating to people.
But localized. What about you, Bichachi, in answering that question, the importance of that, at least to understand in hindsight what went wrong and what should not be repeated? He brings up the issue of professionalism because there's involvement of family on one side and perhaps no family involvement in the campaign team for Kenya Kwanza. Do you see that as an important point to look into for the future?
One of the things that is for sure is the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And the truth is we've tasted and eaten this pudding to a pulp. And the truth is that, yes, there is merit to a centralized campaign. There is merit to an efficiently run campaign. And there is merit to creating a juggernaut, almost with a military structure that has one center of command. There is definitely merit to this. There's just one thing that I would like to correct in terms of what the newspapers say, in terms of saying that Martha Karua and Uhuru Kenyatta did not deliver. Let me tell you, Raila Odinga got 1 million odd votes extra from the mountain. Whether you look at the mountain proper or the mountain in diaspora, they delivered. Azimio Raila Odinga, in fact, has never had such numbers anywhere in central Kenya.
Perhaps the argument is not as good a delivery as expected, because even in the polling stations where each voted, there seemed to be an embarrassing turnout or result of the vote.
Let me tell you, when you're coming from 0, okay, and you get 10 out of 90, you've made progress. And let's remember that unlike Dr. William Ruto, who spent 4 years in Mount Kenya assuring them, Raila Odinga, Uhuru Kenyatta, and Martha Karua spent 4 months. Right? Martha was named running mate in April. So they started off quite late in the game.
Yes.
And the truth is, there was some delivery. It was not to the 30%, the 40% that they had hoped for, but there's a second part of that delivery. The part that Mount Kenya did not show up to vote in the traditional numbers that they used to. If Mount Kenya showed up 90% to vote for William Ruto Daktari, as they had done in 2017, Raila Odinga would not have a chance even in the dark. So the truth is that there was an improvement, a marked improvement in how Raila Odinga got votes in central Kenya. But the truth is that did he run an efficient, smooth campaign? No, he did not. I would be lying to say he did. Is there space for improvement? There is. And for me, Azimio One Kenya Alliance needs to really ask themselves the question, do they want to survive until 2027 and take another stab at this, or do they want to die bickering and fighting as they are?
All right. Now, we really need to move on in terms of the focus on the papers, because just mention of the Business Daily, court freezes new Sport Pesa license amid shareholder row, because the political conversation will continue in our focus of the day. And there doesn't seem to be a break for Sport Pesa, does it? Because it looks like there is a deliberate effort to frustrate such organizations in Kenya. The High Court has stopped the use of Sport Pesa brand in Kenya's gaming business amid shareholder fights in a ruling that deals a blow to Milestone Games Limited that had been allowed to run the popular brand. But this is something else that is on focus in the front page of the Business Daily. Treasury spent 23 billion without MP's nod in Uhuru's last days. First of all, the question here would be to ask, is this money gone, or would this money even come back in any way? Is it something to just say bye-bye to this particular figure? And in the Daily Nation, they're looking at 55 billion shillings, in fact. Let's start with you really quick, Bichachi, and then Didmas.
You know, it's interesting to look at what the monies were spent on, right? So you've got monies that were spent on subsidies, you've got monies that were sent to different ministries, and you've got monies for all over the place, some of them being used by the office of the president and the office of the deputy president for they're calling it catering services.
Yes.
Let's continue with that vein. So there is, in that 55 billion, there is justifiable spending, but there is also unjustifiable spending. Now, the question, and where the buck will stop, is with the parliament. Will parliament rubber stamp this expenditure? And if it does, then there is no illegality. But if parliament says that there is issues here and we're not going to approve this, then the question begins to be asked, what is the correct process of dealing with this kind of expenditure? Let's remember that the executive is not allowed to spend any money without the say-so of parliament. So what is being looked for is a post-fact alignment of this expenditure.
Okay, and we need to sort out your mic, Bichachi. And I don't know if it's your voice or the mic, as you earlier were saying about Didmas. So the joke's back on you. There's an interesting picture here on the Star, and this is Chebukati takes a break after grueling polls, and he's, you know, golfing here. Takes a time off at the Mombasa Golf Club. This is yesterday, and the headline story there is headache for Ruto as MPs ask for more pay. But for this particular one, the interesting is on the back. An interesting story that I'd want us to discuss just shortly is storm rages on. Sports CS Amina bashes Mwendwa for storming Kandanda House, and the picture there of the FKF president Nick Mwendwa opening the gates of Gold Project in Kasarani. So we're getting into the space and you know, place of cabinet being announced. In regards to this particular issue, priority areas for the CS for sports, whether it's the one who is incumbent or if it's going to be a replacement, what do you think needs to be done to sort this FKF mess out?
I'm not much of a man when it comes to soccer, but I know that they are facing a very serious leadership crisis. Now, the leadership crisis has been occasioned by pecuniary interest, because these federations, they tend to have a lot of money, and nobody wants to take responsibility for that resource. Nobody wants to be held accountable. Nobody wants to give figures. Part of the reason why corporate Kenya has got a phobia for sports in Kenya, part of the reason why they cannot sponsor sports in Kenya, there is no infrastructure, there is no accountability, there is nothing. If a giant in Kenya in the corporate sector gives money to any sports federation, to any soccer club, probability of the money going to the leadership pockets is almost 100%. So the new CS for sports, the first thing he or she must do is introduce serious leadership in the sports sector and introduce accountability. Now, the moment you introduce accountability, then people will know resources are not going to be lost.
Yes.
And you know, in other mature economies, what they've done is when you have successful teams that are owned by limited liability clubs, clubs that can even be quoted at the stock market. So that Kenyans, if you love, say, Gor Mahia, and it's a solid company, FC Leopards is a solid company, in fact, you can become a shareholder so that you participate in the ownership. Some of the richest people in the world, in the UK, in the US, are people who have invested in these clubs, people who own this club, because it's a serious business. But for some reason in Kenya, we consider sports clubs or federations as an opportunity to steal resources.
Yeah.
Now,
Bichachi, and I believe we've sorted out the mic now, but okay, I'm told not yet. But okay, sorry about that. it's music to Didmas's ear because he gets to talk a bit more. Let me move now to Taifa Leo then, as we discussed, because we're also going to play a package that was done on Monday by Olive Burrows and Wabunge Wanza Ulafi, and this is in reference to the attempt to bring back the allowances based on what SRC had reviewed in July of this year. Any surprises here? Do you think it's, it is in-your-face kind of move by the wanasiasa, or this is what we should expect, at least as the electorate?
No, the Speaker of the National Assembly, Right Honorable Wetangula, painted a picture of what we think of a member of the National Assembly or Senate or indeed a governor that is the local ATM, is an undertaker, is a, all these kind of things. So that the average voter in Kenya, Mora, has got expectations that when she has no capacity to pay school fees, it's going to be the MP. If she doesn't have capacity to get supper, it's going to be the MP. And I think at the first level, we need to socialize ourselves out of that so that people know the role of an MP is legislation,
yes,
oversight, and representation. But again, because majority of the people we elect to the National Assembly and Senate are not the sharpest tools in the shed, the only thing they know how to use is money.
Yes.
Because you would expect that if you're in the level of somebody like James Orengo, because James Orengo got re-elected times above number, but he never gave people money. People would see his contribution at the National Assembly and Senate, then they say there is a sharp legislator called James Orengo.
He wasn't necessarily a beneficiary of his, closeness to Raila politically?
Well, when you meet with his voters, during the last election, he won, and somebody was looking for him in Nairobi to give him his certificate. He may have been a beneficiary of the relationship with Raila Odinga,
yeah,
but I use him as an example of those sharp legislators.
Yes.
Somebody like Otinda Amolo,
who actually push legislation.
Yeah, and then there used to be a gentleman, the late George Anyona from Kisii, now Nyamira. He told people, you elect me to go and represent you at the National Assembly, not to come and give you tokens. Now, because majority of now our members have no capacity to engage in the National Assembly or even use their CDF. So what they do is they create this dependency syndrome. Have you ever asked yourself that we've got Lake Victoria in Kenya and you can actually engage in fish farming? How come the members of parliament or the leadership around Lake Victoria have not encouraged people to engage in strategic fish farming? You harvest the fish so that this morning the fish from Lake Victoria is landing in London for the British housewife to consume that fish. What happens? All the fish from Kisumu, most of it is processed in Thika. How come you don't have solid factories? I mean, Kenya, we export flowers to Europe. We export vegetables, fruits to Europe. If we have the capacity to do that, why can't we use the international airport in Kisumu to fish from Lake Victoria, package the fish nicely, transport it? The fish doesn't need to come to Nairobi. From Kisumu straight to Heathrow. What is the challenge?
Right.
You have fish right there. And these people have got CDF resources. They've had governors for the last 10 years. So majority of our leaders in Kenya, they're happy to maintain the status quo because they don't want Mura to start reading The Economist or Financial Times or start watching DSTV to understand what leaders do in other parts of the world. They're happy to maintain the status quo so that when they give people 10 bob or they subsidize the cost of unga, we say Hail Mary and vote for them.
Let's bring in Mark Bichachi on this, but with the context of what happened on Monday, and I'd like us to play that story that was done by Olive Burrows. The Speaker of the National Assembly, Moses Wetangula, on Monday, the first day of the members' induction, that one of his first acts in his official capacity has been to champion their cause with the Salaries and Remuneration Commission. Wetangula assured MPs that the perks enjoyed by the 12th Parliament would extend to them, including the sitting allowance for plenary sessions, which the SRC abolished in July. Wetangula gave the assurance of the official opening of an induction retreat for members of the National Assembly. Now here's that report.
I heard you express anger when my dear lady, our clerk, mentioned the SRC.
The emoluments and perks enjoyed by members of parliament was top of the agenda as the 13th Parliament checked into a city hotel for an education on what would be expected of them. In setting the tone for the induction exercise, National Assembly Speaker Moses Wetangula spent a significant portion of his 20-minute speech on the subject of car loans, mortgages and allowances.
Find our staff. They'll show you how to get your mortgage, how to get your car.
Wetangula informing the legislators that one of his first orders of business as Speaker was to take up cudgels on their behalf with the Salaries and Remuneration Commission in response to the abolishing of sitting allowances for plenary sessions.
We live incrementally. We don't live by reduction. Nobody in their right frame of mind will interfere with your car allowances, with your mileage reimbursements, and with your mortgage and everything else that you have been having, because that is your entitlement.
A motion likely to receive bipartisan support.
Members, we can assure you that nothing will change, and if anything changes, it will not be substantial. And we have advised SRC that they are not frustrators but facilitators of members of parliament to do their work well.
On July the 27th, the SRC gazetted reviewed remuneration and benefits for state officers for the period covering 2021 to 2025. Notably, where MPs are concerned, they abolished sitting allowances for plenary sessions but increased their pay by between 134,000 and 214,000 shillings in salary market adjustments.
A member of parliament in your constituency, you are a funeral undertaker, you are a midwife, you are an extension officer in farming, you are a vet, you are a counselor on social issues. You literally do everything. And above all, you are also the local ATM. So my leadership will ensure that we facilitate you to discharge some of these unexpected demands from the public.
Should the reviewed terms hold, your Member of Parliament will take home a gross salary of 710,000 shillings minimum, including a house allowance of 250,000 shillings. Not to mention that they're entitled to a mortgage of up to 35 million shillings.
Take your mortgage now as the cheapest mortgage on the market. I think it's 2-3% interest.
They will also receive at the very minimum 7,500 shillings per committee sitting, up to a maximum of 120,000 shillings per month. MPs are also entitled to a car loan of up to 8 million shillings at an interest rate of 3% per annum. This includes a car maintenance allowance of 356,525 per month and mileage of up to 353,778 shillings monthly. MPs also enjoy medical cover not only for themselves but a spouse and up to 5 children below the ages of 25, with an inpatient cover of 10 million shillings, not to mention dental and optical cover. Among the changes gazetted by the SRC is that it, and not the Parliamentary Service Commission, will set the daily subsistence allowance MPs receive for local and foreign trips. Simply put, per diem. Despite the SRC having stated it was ready to take on MPs over the sitting allowance, which will save the taxpayer 1 billion shillings annually, the remarks made by Wetangula indicate that the SRC may have already been prevailed upon.
I've invited the chair. She will be here. but she will come after I have made the communications I have told you.
Olive Barrows, NTV.
Mark Bichachi, any surprises here with the latest move by the National Assembly Speaker to say under his leadership the perks will be back?
Well, as Speaker, he has to speak to the gallery, as it were. The gallery is intent, if you can hear the applause they're giving him when he talks about them becoming ATMs for the community. Really, this is... let me speak to Kenyans first before I speak to MPs. Number one, Kenyans must understand that the MPs want to keep you poor so they can buy you cheap. That's what it is. When he says you are the local ATM, you are the mortician, you are the midwife, you are all of those things, the only reason you are MP is all of those things is because you are poor. That's why. If you had your own resources, your MP would not need to be your ATM because you would go to the nearest KCB ATM and you would withdraw your own money. The fact that he has to draw a salary on your behalf and therefore justify his salary is a misnomer. That's one. Number two, we need to explain to parliamentarians and to Kenyans that parliament is not executive. It is not the role of parliament to solve local problems. Let me be clear. It is not the role of the MP to bury your mother, your sister, your grandfather, your grandmother at any point. The problems that exist in our society that need to be solved by financing should be done so by the executive. This is the ruling that the courts gave the other day in scrapping CDF, in recognizing that if, and this is where the problem arises, Mark, if you give an MP oversight of CDF, he will not have oversight of government. Because, my friend, that is 100 million shillings upon which he can either decide to underpin his campaign or decide is going to be his personal wallet. And therefore, the matters of state, the matters he's actually employed to oversee, he will not, because he needs to spend a lot of time making sure Mama Shiro and Nyawera and Nyokafi and the rest get their CDF, because he's focused on that more than he's focused on making sure that he's superintending over the government of the day. And this is the problem. Okay. Now, when you combine this issue with the fact that it costs too much money to campaign in this country, let me tell you the truth. If Mark Bichachi, myself, spent 30 million shillings campaigning, and I have 5 years, you best believe I'll be looking at SRC with very bad eyes when they tell me they're reducing my sitting allowance. Why? Because if it costs me 30 million shillings, then I must at least make back 31 million so that there's 1 million shillings extra. So how we've done our politics in this country, how we perceive the role of an MP, etc., is why we will always be here. So what are the solutions? Number one, Kenyans need to begin to fund the leaders they believe in, so that someone is not running on their own money. They're running off of the steam and the energy of the people who support them. This is the case in the United States. It's a case in many places. And what that does is it makes someone content with their salary because they did not invest.
So fund in what way? Like the remuneration to be...
No.
What do you mean?
I mean when Mark Bichachi chooses to campaign,
yes,
and you believe in him, then you dig into your pocket and you get 1,000 shillings, 100 shillings, and you give me to go and represent you. So the campaign resources should come from the people who believe in the politician.
Bichachi, I'm a bit confused here. Are we in Kenya? Ama tuko kwingine?
No, but that's the point.
Because the makeup of the campaign season, at least, I'm not saying it's right by any measure, is that Mheshimiwa comes with something.
With money.
Yes. So that is quite a long shot to expect that it is the electorate who will fund the Mheshimiwa.
For as long as it is the Mheshimiwa who's coming with money, two things are guaranteed. Number one, that they will keep you poor. Because the moment you become rich, remember my first statement, they will keep you poor so that they can buy you cheap.
Right.
The day you become rich, the 200 bob will not be enough to make you vote for someone.
Okay? So they will make sure you stay poor so that when they come with 200 shillings, you think they're Jesus. That's number one. But number two, it also means that the person who's willing to spend the most amount of money is going to win. And why do we find something interesting? There are 75 people with criminal cases. 75 people with criminal cases in the court today, in parliament today. Why? Because a criminal is the one who's most likely to give you money. Easy come, easy go. So at the end of the day, unless we fundamentally change how we vote for leaders, this situation that we have now will continue to obtain. And let me tell Kenyans to their faces, you get the leaders you deserve, because if I bought you, then you did not practice democracy.
Okay, that is just one of the solutions, funding the Waheshimiwas. I'll give you an opportunity to respond to this. No pressure to give any quotable quotes like Bichachi. MPs want to keep you poor so that they can buy you cheap. But this must go ahead in your response to this. The culture, whose fault is it that there's an expectation from Waheshimiwa to give me something, to at least support me when I'm burying my loved one, to at least give me kitu kidogo when he, over the weekend, comes around?
It's actually what Mark has painted very well, that politics in Kenya has become a very good business. Only in Kenya there are a gentleman right now who can't afford a cup of tea at a 5-star hotel across the road. He'll win an election, then after 6 months, probability of this politician owning a 5-star hotel is almost 100%. When these people get into office, during the campaigns they tell us they want to serve Amura. But as soon as they get into office, the first thing they do is to look at procurement. What is available? So that becomes their core business. Have you ever wondered that some of the richest people in Kenya are not businessmen? They're not people in the private sector. No, they are public servants, or people who've been in the public sector, or people who have connections. And retired President Kenyatta at some stage indicated as much. He said that some of the decisions taken at his office then, office of the president, they were influenced by vendors or procurement. That instead of coming up with a development agenda which is moral-centric, it's vendor-centric. And I recall once you had the occasion of interviewing the president then you said, Mr. President, can you make public the SGR contracts? He told you he's going to make it public, but it's not public to date. Why? If SGR is indeed a project funded by the taxpayer, shouldn't the taxpayer look at that contract to establish what's in it here? What is the funding model? Yes. So I think politicians want to do that. And then secondly, a good people have become lazy because they know that you don't need to work hard. Yeah. If you're a local MP, if you lose somebody, your local MP is going to fund they're going to buy the coffin, they're going to pay for your school fees. So some people in good parts of Kenya, they wake up in the morning and they sit under a mango tree. If something happens, they call the local MP and they issue threats. They say, if you don't come for the funeral, we are not going to vote for you. If you don't give us a coffin, we are not going to vote for you. You remember an MP in Kakamega, when Dr. Muisa Kitui came back from his international role, he said, you want to vote for this man? He doesn't attend our funerals. He doesn't attend our weddings. So what business you are voting for him? Yeah. So in my view, we must go back and tell the voter that the role of the MP, as the speaker has indicated, is not to be an ATM. It's to create an environment where you have opportunities to shine. So that if you're a shoe shiner, you can actually shine your shoes to getting a mortgage. If you are a painter, you can paint to get a mortgage that you don't need to depend on these MPs. Okay. That's why Bichachi was talking about campaigns in other parts of the world, that if you want to run for the president of the US, you are Barack Obama and you are not a billionaire, all you need to do is to create a certain brand. People will align with the brand and they'll give you resources. Yep. However, on the flip side, the risk is if people are not giving you 10 bob or 50 bob, if they're giving you 10 million, 1 billion, then the moment you get into office, first of all, you must clear that political debt because there's no free lunch. If somebody gives you 100 million for your campaign, as soon as you are sworn in, as soon as you take the oath of office, they'll come to your office and they say, Sasa, kunaendaje? Yes. Yeah, so, yeah, that is why we said that for all these political parties, there is a need for transparency. We need to know who is funding which political party, who is funding which politician, But again, the members of the National Assembly, in their wisdom, or maybe something else, the campaign financing regulations,
yes,
for some reason they come in late in the day when they're about to close, and then they're placed under the table. They're never
so
sorted
there was
out.
no cap. We weren't able to put a cap on the funding for the campaigns. Let me take a break at this point. Surely it can't all be bad for the members of parliament, or at least from the National Assembly or the Senate. So we can talk to some of the positives, but you had given us one solution, that is the electorate funding. Of course, Dismas has seen perhaps there may be a challenge there because there'll be expectation of a payback. But the other solutions as to getting around this issue of dependency from the electorate for the Mheshimiwa. Again, I'll repeat your quote, MPs want to keep you poor so that they can buy you cheap. No pressure to you, Dismas, but you can give me another quote for the next part of the discussion. Stay with AM Live. Welcome back to AM Live. We're talking about the move, or at least the pronouncement by the National Assembly Speaker on the first day of the induction for the members earlier in the week, that he will ensure that the perks that were enjoyed, the allowances that were enjoyed by the 12th Parliament, will be back for the 13th Parliament and at least National Assembly members. And this is something that will definitely get support. And you could even hear it when we played that story, Bichachi, that it will have support. And I mean, it's surprising how there's some things that unify all the, members of parliament, or, for those in the National Assembly. Much as at the moment there's a war of numbers and who is in control, but they certainly agree on the allowances coming back for them. Is this a populist move to align things politically by the National Assembly Speaker, or will it not sway the numbers?
It does touch the numbers. Why? Because already the fact that he is speaker shows that the Azimio One Kenya Alliance did not vote as one, despite the fact that if you look at the numbers, and I have them here, let me just refer to them so that the viewers have a correct view, is that if you look at the numbers, the Azimio One Kenya Alliance clearly has a majority. ODM party has 73 MPs, Jubilee has 24, Wiper has 21, KANU has 5, DAP Kenya has 5, UPIA has 2, MDG has 1, and NOPEU has 1. That brings them to a total of UPA, UDM, PA, MCCP, KUP, 146. Kenya Kwanza, it comes to 134. So definitely a 12-man lead on the National Assembly. Now, this lead did not translate into election of the speaker. So we must understand that the speaker, being a Kenya Kwanza person, must also play to the gallery to make sure that the numbers swing towards Kenya Kwanza in terms of making decisions. Also, you must remember that our MPs are known to have weird habits. Moses Kuria once said that monies are given in the bathrooms of parliament. You go there and you get an envelope. So if this is the kind of greed and malaise that is going to continue, then we are going to have the same conversations. But Kenyans must ask themselves, because we must contextualize what the issue is. Number one, the SRC is saying you are hired as a member of parliament. Your job is to be in parliament. The salary you are paid is to be in parliament. And then you want to be given a sitting allowance to do what you are paid and chosen to do. It makes no sense. That's double payment. But the other thing that Kenya needs to understand is 1 billion shillings is what will be saved just by removing sitting allowances. 1 billion shillings, if we put it today in terms of making sure that every burial that these MPs claim that they have to spend money on, how many dignified burials would we have in this country if we gave 1 billion shillings into an insurance fund for every Kenyan who passes on? So there are solutions. So what is the second solution? The second solution is, instead of parliament legislating for itself, let them legislate for Kenyans. Let them come up with clever strategies. If you are a midwife, where is the midwife bill? If you are the undertaker, where is the undertaker bill? If you are the person who's in charge of making sure that the hospital bill is paid? Where is the doctor's bill? This is the kind of thinking we need from our parliamentarians. Right. We cannot have 3/4 of them having walked in Parliament in August of 2022, and in August of 2027, the Hansard does not record their name once because they said nothing. And that is the problem. They need to stop leading from their pockets and start leading from their minds. That's the problem. If we go that route, then we will also have more Otiende Amolos, more clever people in Parliament than people who box walls in Nairobi, and then we select them to be leaders.
So certainly there's clever members of Parliament, senators or National Assembly members, but it seems the numbers are less than there are more of what we need in the National Assembly and Senate. So, I mean, as we conclude this matter on the fight for allowances back, let me ask you this. They decide to bring it back. Is there anything the electorate can do but just watch and, you know, wish that, oh, I probably should have voted in someone else, or I should be in Parliament myself?
I think the only thing the voters can do when they file these allowances, at least for this stage, is to yawn. So you can yawn for the next 5 years. You will do nothing else. But let's go for the best practice. Like in the US, if you're the serving member of the Congress or the upper house, Senate, you cannot come up with legislation to benefit for yourself. So like for the members of the National Assembly, the 13th Parliament, if they want to increase salaries, allowances, and everything else in aligned with the SRC, it must be for the 14th Parliament. But because they've got this power today, they can do anything as they deem fit. And my fear is that if the SRC is not aligned to their interest, the SRC leadership may find themselves back home. You remember at some stage when the Anti-Corruption Commission wanted to zoom into members of the National Assembly, the then CEO found himself at home. He was said that he was incompetent, that he didn't understand what he was doing. So they've got a lot of powers. But having said that, there is merit in rewarding our public servants well so that they deliver. Maybe what we need to do is to set up performance indicators that what do we expect you to do, so that we start ranking them. And on the basis of their performance for the next election, such kind of information is made public, highly publicized, so that if you have delivered in your 3 responsibilities, probability of winning the next election is extremely high. But unfortunately, even the president said to them that a number of you fight using all the resources in the world to go to the National Assembly and Senate. Then 5 years later, you have not spoken in that house. 5 years later, nobody is seeing fingerprints of your Mandela in your constituency. So why did you spend all these resources fighting? Because what one expects in the National Assembly and the Senate is having very serious cross-pollination of ideas, intellectual intercourse, so that you come up with ideas and take Kenya to the next level. So that we stop comparing ourselves with our neighbors and we start playing in the same league with UK, US, Singapore, and our peers. Yes. So there's a very valid expectation that if you come from, say, from around Lake Victoria, you will be pushing for legislation or motions so that you start exporting fish from Lake Victoria to the European markets. If you come from the northeastern or the arid areas like Wajir and Garissa, you know, that part of the world, that you'll be pushing for us to have irrigation. Have you ever wondered that a drought in Kenya can be predicted? Even by a kid who has not done CBC, you can predict when you're going to have these droughts. But how come it's always treated as an emergency? Yes. 10 years after devolution, it's still being treated as an emergency. Can you convince anybody that the governors from that part of the world, senators and members of the National Assembly, do not understand what irrigation is? Or maybe they've never visited Israel to understand how irrigation
we've
can
seen
be done.
benchmarking trips.
Yeah, but how come they've not converted that? How come they've not converted that? Yeah. Can you explain to a number of Kenyans why most counties that are next to Lake Victoria, that are next to the Indian Ocean, have no water? There's no water in the taps, that you have to keep on buying water. Can somebody explain that? So these are some of the things that we expect the leaders to zoom in.
Tell me this, gentlemen, as we close this issue on the perks and the fight to get back the allowances, is there anything the president, the leader of Kenya Kwanza, the leader of the government who has run on a bottom-up approach, economic approach. Is there anything that he can do, much as the electorate can't do anything about this if the National Assembly members of Parliament bring it back? That can he say something or do something to, have them, calm down and not increase or reintroduce the allowances? And also, in the name of whether it is playing to the gallery, show Kenyans that indeed we are taking every measure, austerity measure, to ensure that we benefit the people and not ourselves. Is there anything? I'll start with you, Bichachi, and then...
There's a lot he can do. Number one, he can pivot to his campaign messaging, the bottom-up messaging about getting resources down to the people and making sure that the dynasties, the big boys who are in parliament today are not the beneficiaries, the sole beneficiaries of government. So yes, he can do that. And the problem is that there will be political ramifications for him. Remember, he's got a cabinet that he needs to get approved. He's got a host of changes that he needs to do, that he needs to get approved. But I think, will it be worth it? Yes, it will be worth it. Why would it be worth it? Because it will have the Kenyan people supporting him. Why? Because he will be walking his talk. And his talk was about making sure that the wealthy are not the beneficiaries of government solely, but rather we see more resources going to the people. This 1 billion shillings that is being saved by Parliament, if he can convince his own parliamentarians to say, you know what, this 1 billion shillings is going to go down, and make sure that in any county, in any constituency, we are not going to have issues of funerals and hospital bills and things like that. Because also, when the MPs are defending hospital bills, while the president is talking about NHIF and making universal healthcare something that is real for Kenyans, we cannot have our cake and eat it too. So MPs, my friend, some of us, if we earn 700,000 shillings, will be the richest people in our villages. So please be content. 700,000 shillings is not chump change.
Yes. Is, in your view, it is going to have a cost to him politically, but would it be worth it?
Well, I think now you've gone to the space of anthropology, that when you're discussing these issues, it's actually a society expectation that this is what we expect our leaders to do. Back in the village, when you go to visit your local chief, you have a valid expectation that they'll give you a banana or chicken, or in other places, fish, or even a mango. But in my view, what we must look at, let's not look at the allowances in isolation. Let's give them allowances that reflect the expectations of Kenyans, but demand delivery. Pay them top dollar, but demand delivery. Part of the reasons why some of these organizations like KCB, Safaricom, they post huge profits is their CEOs are given top dollar, but the shareholders expect delivery. If you don't deliver, then you take a walk. Because it's practically impossible for an MP to go to the village today and tell people that mumeona kwa TV, sasa siku hizi hakuna pesa, so don't come seeking for anything. I think it needs to be a gradual process. However, the person now who has the highest capacity to inflict pain or pleasure to the members of the National Assembly and Senate is a President Ruto. So in my view, we need to come up with a system, a nice system of reward. Let's give them allowances, which are not obscene, but let's demand service for the resources they are receiving. Unfortunately, we tend to vilify members of the National Assembly and Senate for allowances because for them it's very visible. Somebody did an account of allowances, and I think in the public sector, you have about 81 allowances. Yeah. There's airtime allowance, there's an allowance for everything. So if you're going to remove these allowances, let's remove them across the board. But do not just sacrifice members of the National Assembly and Senate because the allowances make people ticklish.
All right. Let's now move to the issue of who has the numbers, and Bichachi touched on it by giving us the numbers of majority, whether it's for Azimio, leaning to Azimio or Kenya Kwanza. And this is a story that was done early in the week as well by Kennedy Mureithi. The Kenya Kwanza Alliance in the National Assembly will be pushing for the exclusion of members from 4 political parties now within the Azimio One Kenya coalition in the determination of who has majority in the House, arguing there is an ongoing case over their continued stay in the coalition. According to key figures within the Kenya Kwanza Alliance in Parliament, the 4 parties, Maendeleo Chap Chap, the Movement for Democracy and Growth, the United Democratic Movement, and the Pamoja African Alliance are in Azimio against their will. NTV senior political affairs reporter filed this report. That is Kennedy Murray.
When the National Assembly resumes next week and the real work of Parliament starts, one of the hurdles the Speaker of the National Assembly will have to get over is the question of which political formation has the majority. According to the Azimio One Kenya coalition, they have 172 members, while their competitors in the government side, that is Kenya Kwanza, have around 165 members. Kenya Kwanza argues that cannot be the correct position, noting the recent events that have seen a number of political parties desert Azimio One Kenya, with their MPs asserting that should count for something. The United Democratic Movement has 7 MPs. The Maendeleo Chap has 2 MPs. The Pamoja African Alliance has 3 MPs. And the Movement for Democracy and Growth has 1 MP.
If you look at the arithmetics after the elections and the people who have been gazetted and sworn in, we have the highest number of seats. Whether you look at it from the purview of individual political parties or even coalition of political parties.
I hear some people saying that now they are going to remove UDA and make it have UDA as a party, ODM as a party, WIPE as a party. That is not the spirit of the law. It's not even the letter of the law. The law is clear. It's a party or coalition of parties, meaning where you don't have coalition of parties, it will be a party. Where you have coalition of parties, then it is coalition of parties.
And Azimio One Kenya was then registered as a coalition political party. That Azimio coalition political party is not a parliamentary party because it doesn't have a single member of parliament.
There is the Azimio One Kenya coalition, which is both a political party and a coalition of party. And this has been allowed by our law. We amended the Political Parties Act to allow this to be in place.
A coalition agreement is subservient to a provision of the Constitution and more so in the Bill of Rights.
The Azimio One Kenya coalition is depending on the legal interpretation of the law, banking on Article 108 of the Constitution, which states there shall be a leader of the majority party and a leader of the minority party. The leader of the majority party shall be the person who is the leader in the National Assembly of the largest party or coalition of parties. The leader of the minority party shall be the person who is the leader of the National Assembly of the second largest party or coalition of parties. Kenya Kwanza, however, holds Azimio One Kenya is holding political parties hostage.
Azimio today says we signed a pre-election agreement with UDM. But the leader, Senator Ali Roba, has pretended they never signed anything. Chap, they will tell you they were only shown under duress, a dotted line of a one-page document to sign.
If they were coerced, there is a process to prove coercion, and that is the process they must follow. If they were just given the dotted line to sign, they must go to court and prove that that is the case. Then the court will pronounce itself that now they are legally and officially out of the coalition.
The Kenya Kwanza Alliance now wants the Speaker to set aside the 4 political parties, as there is a case in court challenging their continued stay in Azimio. This will affect about 13 MPs who the coalition is banking on.
Just like in marriage, where the 2 partners may have issues, before the divorce is finalized in court, it is still a marriage. You cannot enter into another marriage until the divorce that is in court has been finalized.
Where is there a dispute? Because Azimio Council, which was chaired by Uhuru Kenyatta, refused to exit parties that wanted to exit Azimio. And they refused to convene the meeting that they were supposed to convene to allow them to exit.
They signed the agreement that 3 months before election and also 3 months after election. Now after 3 months after election, they can move, and that will be maybe end of November.
My friends and my good friend and my chair, Opiyo Wandayi, he should start internalizing himself that is the leader of the minority coalition.
With both teams having advanced their arguments for and against the stance they are taking, the decision now rests on the Speaker.
It's not even for the Speaker to make a ruling. In fact, I would be shocked the Speaker would act rogue, in my view, if he attempted to define which side is a majority and which other side is minority.
Nothing has come before me yet, so I don't want to preempt any issue. When it does come, we'll give it a reasoned approach and communicate to the parties involved. I'm sure it's not a difficult thing to decide. When it comes, we look at the law, we look at the constitution, we look at the standing orders.
Kennedy Muredhi, NTV.
So that is the end, the last part of our discussion. That is the majority or the game of numbers within Parliament. What is at play here, gentlemen? Are they hoodwinking the Kenyans, hoodwinking themselves? Are they in touch with the reality? And I'm talking about Azimio, a coalition, as well as Kenya Kwanza. What is at play?
There are several variables. If you look at the theory, Azimio has got a majority in the National Assembly. If you look at the theory, Azimio has got a majority in the National Assembly. If you look at the theory, the Senate Speaker is an Azimio member, Honorable Amason Kingi, using their logic. But where the rubber meets the road, it's Kenya Kwanza. And they demonstrated that first by electing the two speakers, National Assembly as well as Senate. Mm-hmm. Now, if you go to the MPs right now, they're going through the induction process, and you tell them by a show of hands, can I see how many in Kenya Kwanza? The queue will be longer than the one for Azimio. So in my view, Azimio is merely clutching on straws. Okay. And as they try to internalize that, they must ask themselves, when you talk about Azimio, is it a coalition of parties or it's a coalition party? In which case, it doesn't even have an elected member anywhere. Maybe it's got only two members, Honorable Raila Odinga and Martha Karua. Then the other parties are standalone. So if you look at it from the Azimio perspective, I mean, if it's a coalition political party or a coalition of parties, they don't have the physical numbers. It's Kenya Kwanza. If you break it down, the party with the largest number is UDA. So in my view, what they must quickly do is to socialize with that unpalatable idea that they're going to be in the minority and ask themselves how they're going to make the sun, so how they're going to make hay while the sun is still shining. And the reason why Kenya Kwanza is very keen to ensure that they keep on reminding everybody about the numbers is that when you have those numbers, then you will chair almost all committees apart from pick and pack. You will be able to drive your agenda, because Dr. Ruto ran on this bottom-up agenda, and he needs to come up with so many pieces of legislation to implement that. Now, if you don't have the majority, then it's going to be a tall order, because every single day you'll be pleading with Opio and I and company. And even if we stick to the theory, as soon as we get to the 9th of November, then the theory and practice will now merge. They will harmonize. So there's a chance that if Mr. Wetangula wants to look just on the theory, then the Azimio will be majority till around November. But as it is right now, there's an accounting concept called substance over form, which confirms the one fact that the majority in the National Assembly is Kenya Kwanza. So in my view, instead of Azimio clutching on straws, let them accept reality. They look at the numbers, and then they say, let's now become a loyal opposition, so that they can demonstrate that, in fact, there are government in waiting for 2027. Because right now, if you want to retain positions, say, on the basis of technicality, every single Kenyan can look at you and say, no, wait a minute, there's something amiss here. Because if Kenya Kwanza didn't have a majority, they wouldn't have elected those two speakers. And then finally, people know that during the formation of Azimio, a number of political parties and the politicians were forced to join Azimio under duress. That they were told, if you don't join this coalition, then you're going to see hell. So they moved not on their own motion. But now that there is a freedom, they're saying let's have a breath of fresh air. Let's have our freedom of association and speech. So they moved on the other side. They've decided to join Kenya Kwanza.
Okay.
So in my view, it will not be very complicated for Mr. Wetangula to take a decision.
All right.
Yeah, because, you know, as they say, the scoreboard doesn't lie. When you are in a soccer match, numbers don't lie.
Bichachi, why is this important to, you know, at least define or distinguish whether it is for Parliament or even for the Mwananchi, that this is even a topic of discussion? Because in terms of what impact it has for legislation and implementation of policies, why does this matter, that who has a majority?
If Azimio today has majority, then they will have leadership of many of the parliamentary committees. Parliament conducts its business through committees. If you do not have the chairmanship of the committees, then your agenda becomes harder to push. But also, and more critically for Azimio, being the party that is not in government, having majority allows itself the opportunity to reward many more of its ranks with chairmanship of certain committees. So it is both about running parliament and therefore running government business in parliament, and it is also about the ability of Azimio to show up its numbers. Now, this issue is very clear in terms of law. In terms of the law, the parties that exist within the Azimio One Kenya Alliance are clear, and they are obviously in the majority. Now, in the minority is Kenya Kwanza. However, based on different signatures, different agreements, and different conflicts that are happening now, there are people who've moved in their hearts to Kenya Kwanza, but they've not moved legally from Azimio. And to use the analogy of marriage, if you happened to die in between an argument between you and your spouse, then your spouse will remain to be next of kin. And this is the issue. So in my mind, the solution is very simple. On the record, Azimio is the majority party. Give them majority. If that record is to change, then let it change then. Why? Because in this country we have a tradition. When Jubilee was split in the middle, and there were people in UDA in spirit and in Jubilee on record, we continued as if Jubilee was intact. So let us not pretend that Kenya has not been in this situation before. In fact, the last 5 years, that's where we have been. So let us respect the letter of the law, respect Azimio's majority, and when and if the courts decide that Azimio has lost certain parties within its coalition and they've moved now to Kenya Kwanza, and Kenya Kwanza can demonstrate that they have overcome the 12-man majority, then let it change. I do not understand why we're acting as though it's a crisis. Right now, the law is clear. Azimio is leading. And the question of whether it is a party or a coalition of parties is that it's both. The law created an entity where you've got a coalition and a coalition of parties.
The question probably is there a gray area, as well as is it a fallacy that Azimio One Kenya coalition party does not have a member of parliament in the national?
You see, if you look at it in terms of what party is assigned to someone in parliament, you'd say Azimio does not have a single party. But then, by the same argument, you will say Kenya Kwanza does not have a single parliamentarian. Who is in Kenya Kwanza? In fact, at least in Azimio, the running mate and the candidate were in Azimio. In Kenya Kwanza, UDA is the one that hosted the party.
Dismas, you don't agree with
so
this
we
point?
cannot have that argument one way and not the other.
Dismas.
Now, what Mark has said is the argument we must have, that Kenya Kwanza is a coalition of parties. And they are listed. There is a UDA, ANC, Ford Kenya. It's listed. Dr. Ruto ran as a UDA presidential candidate, not as a Kenya Kwanza candidate, but he's the head of the Kenya Kwanza coalition. While on the other hand, Raila Odinga ran as an Azimio la Umoja coalition party presidential candidate. There's no other person who ran for any elective office in the manner that Raila Odinga did. Others ran with their political parties.
Yes.
So that is going to be very easy. It's not going to be confusing. And the Honorable Dwala has raised a fundamental question. There is a coalition agreement superior to the Constitution, which gives you freedom of association, freedom of speech, and all these kind of things. But all said and done, you did ask a very important question. How does this affect morale back in the village? If Kenya Kwanza controls all those important committees, and more so the Budget and Appropriation Committee, yes, they will immediately run with their bottom-up agenda and start implementing their policies by allocating resources. But if this all-important Budget and Appropriations Committee is under the control of Azimio, then you're going to have an issue.
Okay.
And then also Mark Bichacha has spoken about rewarding people in the National Assembly. And in my view, it's not about, I hope Azimio is not fighting for majority status because they want to reward members of the National Assembly. We did not vote for MPs, either Kenya Kwanza or Azimio, to reward themselves. We want them to start addressing the cost of fertilizer, the cost of living in Kenya.
All right, we need to conclude. We only have 2 minutes for this. How long will this hold? That is, whatever we're calling the majority for either side, for the period of this regime, because there are cases where the sponsoring party would say, if you've defected, then you should also, let go of your political position. How long will it hold as you conclude and as you conclude? Mark?
First and foremost, in this country, MPs defect, but never on paper. They defect in practice, they defect in rallies, but remain members of the party they are fighting. And that behavior will continue. It will continue because our MPs are used to a certain custom. So I don't see any MP losing his seat because of this particular movement. How long will it hold? Depends. And this is really the message for Azimio One Kenya Alliance. It really depends on whether Uhuru Kenyatta, Raila Odinga, Martha Karua, Stephen Kalonzo Musyoka will continue to have a political agenda for this country. If they have an agenda, then Azimio has a chance to last. But if they do not have an agenda, then Azimio will struggle. But be sure, now that the Kenya Kwanza coalition is the one that is in power, let me tell you one thing. More than principles, our elected leaders love power. And where will they gravitate? To where power is.
Watu wanaoga wanarudi soko haraka sana. How long will it hold as you conclude?
There's not a single Kenyan, an elected member of the National Assembly who has ever lost their seat on account of defection.
Yes.
It's practically impossible. And in my view, the National Assembly and the Senate must have their act in order quickly because there are acts of state capture ongoing in Kenya. There are so many financial transactions, your banks acquiring each other, mergers, acquisitions, hostile takeovers that they need to look at.
Yeah.
But more important, the cost of living. Yes. Because right now, Mura wants to see that somebody is lowering or reducing the cost of living and making Kenya competitive.
And right now, not Mora, but Olive Barrows wants to see us out of studio because it's her turn. Dismas Mokua, political risk analyst, and Mark Bichachi, political analyst. Thank you for your thoughts and time this morning. Let's give time and now the opportunity. Actually, your story that you did on Monday did set the tone for this conversation on the allowances coming back. And again, I'll go by Bichachi's quote, and I'm not paid for this. MPs want to keep you poor so that they can buy you cheap. He said that. Dismas said a lot of important things as well.
All right. And speaking of Dismas's Mora,
yes.
We're actually, you probably think, what, aren't we over COVID? But yes. Are you up to date with your vaccines?
Right.
And also we'll be looking at a thyroid awareness.
I'm a bit worried by Bichachi. He's been sniffling all through there. So we're not over COVID.
Yeah, you've been spraying me with things that cause allergies.
Thank you, gentlemen. Over to you, Olive.
All right. See you in the next couple of minutes on Your World.